family, I'm an addict named Nate.
Hey.
Man, congratulations, Luigi. I thought you were going to talk a lot longer. You're usually long-winded, so I don't know what happened tonight.
Good to hear you.
Congratulations, to the gentlemen that pick up the white key tags. We definitely need you. Welcome home. It's crazy. I was sitting here because he had asked me about 3 weeks ago to speak on, the first step out of the basic text. So that gave me 3 weeks to think of a million things that I was going to say, this, that, you know what I mean? And then it's like, now that I'm here, shit blank, right? But I always like to read something in the beginning. It kind of allows me to get outside of myself, and it allows God to come in. So it's from the It Works How and Why. Yet there are limits to what we can do to help another addict. We cannot force anyone to stop using. We cannot give someone the results of working the steps, nor can we grow for them. We cannot magically remove someone's loneliness or pain. Not only are we powerless over our own addiction, we are powerless over everyone else's. We can only carry the message. We cannot determine who will receive it. It is absolutely none of our business to decide who is ready to hear the message of recovery and who is not. Many of us have formed such a judgment about an addict's desire for recovery and have been mistaken. Multiple relapse do not necessarily signify a lack of interest in recovery, nor does the model newcomer demonstrate without a doubt a certainty of making it. It is our purpose and our privilege to share the message of recovery unconditionally with anyone expressing a desire to receive it. And for me, like reading that, it kind of like correlates into the first step, right? Like I was thinking about, like what I was going to say, right? Like the first step for me, like powerlessness and unmanageability, right? Like those are two words that I associated weakness with, throughout my entire life. You showed any of that, you were weak, right? You were a pussy, you got beat up, you got all of these things, right? So it was like one of those defense mechanisms that I've always carried to never show any of that, I remember like my first time in recovery, in 2008, I was introduced to another fellowship, but I was introduced to recovery, right? And in that moment, like I was thinking, right, like the powerlessness and unmanageability, like it was crazy to look back and see what I thought powerlessness and unmanageability was. Like I thought it was all the exterior stuff. Like I never looked at the internal stuff. I never looked at me, right? I looked at what other people saw, and what other people saw, that was great. So if they saw what was great, that was great. You know what I mean? And with it, man, it's just like crazy how over the years, right? Like in that first time, it talks about like in our basic text, just about like using against our will, right? And I remember that first time around, like I had a God under my understanding, right? But that honesty was not there, right? Like everything was conditional, it was like, God, you do this, I'll do this. You do this, I'll do this. Like I had so many moments of clarity, but they were never followed by any type of action, And one thing that always pops up to me is words without action is manipulation, right? And I look at that, and that's such a big thing. And, because I love to manipulate. If I can get over on you no matter what, how, what, where, anything like that, like I feel like I'm succeeding. I feel like I'm getting over. It was like a sick game that I always loved to fucking play, And it's crazy how that carried on, right? And so, like now, and it talks about like reservations in our basic text. You know what I mean? Like our foundation is in jeopardy whenever we have reservations. And that first time around, I heard about the reservations. And it was like, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, it's not that bad. I'm different. I'm that. Sitting up here or standing up here, I know today that I'm not special. I'm not unique. Everything that I'm saying, I've heard somebody else say, just in my own words, in my own way. That's all it is. And that's kind of how this thing works from, when everything began, right? And it's just one addict helping another without parallel. And that's such a powerful thing, and then I remember making that decision to use, right? It was that my mom got diagnosed with advanced 4-stage cancer, so I went back to New Mexico, right? After I had like 3.5 years clean at that time, right? And everything was easy, right? Everything seemed great. Everything seemed cool. Like I had friends, I had this, I was invited to places and all that stuff, right? And it says specifically social acceptability does not equal recovery, right? And in that first time around, right? Like that's what my perception of what recovery was completely distorted. Like I thought it was a social acceptability, right? Like the more people that liked me, the more people that invited me, the more people that, wanted me around, it was like, oh, cool. You know what I mean? Like, this is what recovery is. But meanwhile, the one thing I was never doing, I was never being honest about who I truly was. They talk about like, secrets keeping us sick, right? And I talked about what I thought I could deal with, what I felt like I could handle with a little bit of God's stamp on it, right? But it was conditional, right? Like every decision that I've made, I had no faith. It was just a bunch of bullshit, right? Like I can have a pile of shit, I can spray some Febreze on it for a minute, it's gonna smell good for 2-3 minutes, it don't change the fact that it's still a pile of shit. And that's what my decision was. That's what I stamped God's name on. It was a pile of shit thinking it was my own, right? So it was still, taking my own will, just manipulating it, you know what I mean? And ultimately, I went back out for another 7 years, and coming in this time around, I was thinking about it, right? And I always thought like there was a prerequisite for NA, right? You had to be homeless, you had to be toothless, you had to shoot dope with puddle water, you had to steal your mom's turkey at Thanksgiving. Like I thought these were all prerequisites, And so this time around, like I had a friend tell me like, come home to NA, come home to NA. And I was like, well, you know what? In my mind, like I had like, I don't fit in, I don't belong. What I told myself my entire life. I will do anything and everything to tell myself that I do not belong, I'm not a part of, and I'm not good enough, right? And so I remember coming back to Florida, March of 2019. And, I was staying with my friend and her husband, and she had 10 years clean at the time. And, man, I just remember, like the unmanageability of it, right? Like I was going to work and then she worked nights, and so I had like my own entrance. And I remember like multiple mornings, like I would try to sneak in and somehow she would always fucking catch me, right? And what do? Try to manipulate. I fucking start crying, bawling my eyes out, right? And it's like, because at that time, I was comfortable with showing anger, frustration, ego. That's what I knew how to do, you know what I mean? And when everything hit the fan, you know what I mean? Like, tears have always worked before, why are they not gonna work now? And it did for a minute, and the first couple times, and then she would take me to a meeting, and I remember reading Would You Recover? And I got like 3 sentences into it, or 3 like words into it, and I just started crying, like I don't remember much else about that meeting. And the next time I remember she caught me and I started crying. She told me, like, I received a lot of tough love, right? But I've never received it. I always thought people were attacking me and all of this stuff. And so she told me, she was like, when you're done with your fucking boo-hoos and your wham-whams, I'm here. When she said that, man, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, damn, like, I received that. For the first time, I felt the love through the tough love, And this time around, it was going into treatment, blah, blah, all that stuff. I thought about it, and it was like taking that first step of honesty. What is powerlessness and unmanageability? And I remember going to the meetings first off and hearing the readings, man, and I'm like, you know what, that's me. But like they say, like birds of a feather flock together, right? Whatever I'm looking for, no matter what it is, I'm gonna find it. And with that time, right, like I always felt like my bottom was not enough, that I had to do all of these things, right? Like I had to be homeless, I had to do all of these things in order to be accepted as a member of Narcotics Anonymous, right? But how mistaken was I? And the more I kept coming around, something just clicked, right? And that's why I love reading so much about, like it doesn't matter, we can't judge an addict's desire to stay clean, right? Because has somebody judged mine all the times I was in and out, man, like if I didn't get shown any type of love, man, I probably wouldn't be here. Right? Because that's what we do, is we don't shoot our wounded, or for me, I'll speak for myself. I do my best not to shoot our wounded, right? Because having been there, we're all there. We all have to start somewhere, And for us, multiple times, sometimes a white key tag, sometimes 15, 30 white key tags, right? That just makes more experience, you know what I mean? And I had to understand that, and taking that first step, right? Coming in and getting a sponsor, talking about the powerlessness and unmanageability, like I had to take a step back, right? And I had to understand that my powerlessness and unmanageability is gonna look different than yours and yours and yours and yours, whether it was, you're the high penthouse roller and you're an addict, or you're the bottom of the barrel and you're living in a dumpster, right? It does not matter, right? Like, if I looked at the differences, you know what I mean? Like, I would still tell myself I'm different. I'm not that, I'm better than, right? And, but I understood that the feelings, the emotions, the self-hatred, the resentment, the guilt, the shame, the remorse, all that stuff, right? Like, I can relate to pain, right? In the beginning, I can relate to pain. Coming up, and hearing people share about like how happy their lives were and all of this stuff, in the beginning I didn't relate to that, you know what I mean? Because like I didn't know how to get that, nor did I know how to even keep anything that was resemblance of any type of happiness, you know, and from that, you know, I just stayed, right? And I remember asking my sponsor to sponsor me, and had I known I would be in a group of like a big sponsorship family, you know, I know the first assignment he gave me was he put me in a group chat of like 19 guys, and I'm like, oh shit, like I had trouble calling one, and now you want me to call 19, right? And the big thing to talk about, like, you know, the phone weighs so much and all this stuff, right? And it was put to me that my sponsor said, he was like, you know, it's not your responsibility to determine how the conversation goes, that's ours. It's your responsibility to pick up the phone and call. That's it. You know, and for me that took some pressure off of really like having to force a conversation, right? I don't like the small talk, I don't like the bullshit, I'm very reserved, you know, and like coming in tonight, like there was a lot of fear of what am I gonna say, you know, is it gonna try to come out as ego, is it gonna be this, is it gonna be that, you know, and realizing that, you know, no matter what is said, how it's said, anything like that, you know, like I took a step out and I tried to remove myself, so whatever is said, you know, and with it, right, like, you know, it talks about becoming employed, socially acceptable, and reunited with our families that does not make our lives manageable, right? Like coming in, like I can sit here and I can say, I'm an addict and I'm this, I'm that, like I'm ready to quit, right? But if I don't get off my ass and on my feet and put in some work, what am I really doing? I'm still sitting here, you know, words without action, I'm still manipulating, right? I can come in here and I can cry and I can say all of this stuff, but like Luigi said, like this is a 12-step program for me. Right? And my experience is I got to do the work, you know what I mean? I have to do the work, and it talks about too, you know what I mean? Like we don't just magically get this, right? We don't just magically do anything like that. We learn to live this. And that's just one of the biggest things is learning to live it, right? Like learning how to be my authentic self. And honesty, the spiritual principle of the first step, honesty, right, is something that I struggled with a long time, right? Like I love to lie over this, over that, over little things. I thought it was like a game, right? It was like a sick game. Like if I could tell you 30 lies, if I can remember 28 and a half of them, shit, like I won. You know what I mean? And I loved the manipulation game. So, right, so coming in and getting, like Kigo said, you know, getting naked, right? And putting it out on the table and realizing that my life is unmanageable, right? Like having a place, having a job, stuck in the car, high as a kite, taking 5 hours just to get to my door, meanwhile staying there another 3 hours thinking the shadow people are coming for me, you know, and then the next, you know, 40 minutes I have to be to work, you know, and then being at the crematory thinking that, you know, the funeral procession that was coming in, man, the cops were coming for me. The shadow people were my cops. Cops were my shadow people. They were everywhere and everything, right? And the unmanageability of that, right, is like the emotional pain inside, right? Like, granted, I was on the verge of losing my job, of losing everything like that, but the emotional pain, the rock bottom, like we don't have to do those things. We don't have to do all that stuff. Like our bottom is where we stop digging, right? And where I stopped digging and I got honest, right, like recovery was then able to start to be applied in my life, you know, and being able to get honest with another man, right, is scary, right? Because like, who wants to admit their powerlessness? Who wants to admit their lives unmanageable, right? As a man, you know, it's unspoken, I guess, from where I come from, that like, you don't show feelings, you don't show emotions, you do this, you do that, you take care, you're a provider, you're all of these things, so anything else, you're a failure. You're a failure. You know, so coming in and hearing, you know, like, for instance, like my home group, right? Like, Together We Grow on Thursday nights at 8, Sundays at 5 o'clock. Come check us out. But like, you know, like seeing some, you know, grown men sit around, talk about feelings and emotions and hardships and successes and all of that stuff, man, it's still something that's definitely uncomfortable, right? Like unmanageability, it doesn't say specifically drugs, it says addiction, right? And once I put the drugs down, man, that can take form in a lot of other things, right? Like being clean for a little bit of time, you know, like I'm in my second round of steps and doing a first step again, you know, it was a lot more difficult to see where my life was unmanageable and where I'm powerless, right? Because like I get a little recovery and I think I'm the shit, right? Like, oh this, oh that, you know, but when I get humble and I get honest about really what's going on, you know, addiction to porn, to food, to sex, to gambling, to all this stuff, right? It's about the behaviors for me. Right? The behaviors is what takes me out. being honest about the behaviors in that, right? Because I can't get help, and I can't start to recover, and I can't start to work on some stuff until I get honest about what the hell is really going on with me, right? Because like, I can pretend, right? We can all pretend, but we don't recover. We don't recover, and we don't get help, right? So, like I always suffered in silence. I was a fan of suffering in silence, right? I don't have to live like that anymore today, right? I don't have to suffer in silence. I can get honest. I can speak my truth no matter what that looks like. You may not like it, you may not understand it, but at the same time, if it's going to save my life, I need to speak my truth no matter what that looks like. So, I don't know. I think that's pretty much what I have, man. All I can say is no matter what, keep coming back. You know what I mean? If you have 5 days, 20 days, 30 days, if this is your 16th time picking up a white key tag or anything like that, keep coming back. It does not matter. Keep coming back. As long as there's a heartbeat, there's an opportunity. I'm a grateful addict. Thanks for letting me share.